Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is David Flyler with the Music Division, and it is another one of these great nights where I'm extremely excited to have our guests here. I've got composer Jeff Scott, Jennifer Grimm, flutist with the Zéphyros Winds, and Audrey Andrist, who's our pianist tonight, for this wonderful program that is going to be hitting a lot of repertoire that you will not usually get to hear. And so there's been a long time coming, but I'm very excited that it's finally here. So forgive me for gushing for a moment, but can't help it. I'm a wind quintet fan, so So one of the things that's really special about this evening is that it has been it's possible because of the Verna and Irving Fine Endowment in the Library of Congress. And one of the things that that this fund supports is not only this kind of music from mid-century American mostly material, but also the actual music of Irving Fine. And because of his early death, we don't have as much music as we would have liked to. And one of the kind of fun things about this evening is that we actually get to hear a new version of an Irving Fine work and kind of hear that for the first time. And I think that it's going to be something that is going to enter into the repertoire. That's my prediction here. So, so thanks everybody for being here. And let's maybe just start with talking about this program because it is such an interesting one. Our first half is wind quintet centric, but there's also a wind quartet. And we start with a transcription. So you've got Leonard Bernstein's Candide Overture. And this is kind of a intense transcription. Maybe, Jennifer, you want to say, and you played it, of course, too, Jeff, so.
Yes, well, it's such a wonderful piece, and wind quintet as a genre it's really unique and really difficult to play. You know, when you think of chamber music, maybe most of us think about string chamber music where all of the instruments are really blended together. They're really variations of one instrument, right? And so when you have a wind quintet, you have 5 disparate instruments making sound different ways, having different timbres, having different challenges, and also different triumphs, different strengths as well. And so when you put that all together into chamber music, it really, it adds so much color and variety to what's possible. And also, it makes it also in a way challenging because you have to think of things in multiple ways. You know, if you think about a string quartet, you can look at their bow and they know, okay, when do I start playing? Oh, when the bow goes like that, right? So how can you tell when a flutist starts to play? You can't really tell. So sometimes, ensemble, you'll see us sort of gesturing maybe differently, or like it's a subtle art to sort of figure out and overcome the challenges of playing wind chamber music. So that's part, like sort of technically, some of the interesting things that I've learned from playing chamber music over the years, But by having such different sounds possible, it allows us to play orchestral pieces like this. And so when you hear this transcription, there's a lot going on, but there's very little that you miss because you hear all of that sonority in the 5 instruments of the wind quintet. So, and it's really challenging if you also think about it. It's a whole, 100-piece orchestra, barreled down to 5 people, so like each one of us is 20 people. So it's a lot of work, and so we put it first so we can get it out of the way. But it's also an overture, so it makes sense that it would be at the beginning of the program. But in a way, it's the most challenging piece on the program because of its complexity, I would say.
Sure. Oh, that's wonderful. And it's also another example of transcription, so we get a chance to kind of have that as a secondary theme tonight. And one of the first half of the program is American composers from this period, and the next piece on the program is a quartet by Arthur Berger from about 15 years or so earlier. Has anybody heard this piece out of curiosity? Has anybody? Well, Of course you know, but
It's the Library of Congress, David. What do you expect?
I'm embarrassed for having asked the question. I apologize. Well, but maybe you could tell us a bit about, is this, I guess this is one that you haven't played, Jeff.
Yeah, so the Berger Quartet, for wind quintet without horn, and so it's a woodwind quartet, so flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon, and so it's a little bit more intimate, right? And this piece, I think it was written in the 40s, 41, and so you can really hear elements of, this Americana. You can, if you close your eyes, you might think, oh, this could be Copeland, or this could be Irving Fine, or this could be, there's a lot of composers that have a similar sort of aesthetic around this time, and you really hear that. It's very syncopated, and it really owes a lot to jazz, and I think in a way, it's very groovy. I really enjoy it. I played this piece with different ensembles over the years. I probably played this piece for the past 20 years with different groups, and every time it's fresh sounding to me. These pieces that just can last, and they're not they're very timeless as opposed to timely. I think this is a real timeless piece. Even though it's from the 40s, it sounds like it's, it could be written at any point in time because of that kind of syncopated, kind of rhythmic integrity that comes through the entire piece. It's very, very cool. I really enjoy it.
I think it was said that Mio was like a big influence on this. He actually Mio was a senior faculty member, I think, where he was teaching at the time, and so kind of served as his teacher or mentor, at least, during that period.
Was this in the Bay Area in California? Because I know it was commissioned by San Francisco Symphony, and I know Mio taught at Mills College in Oakland. I'm from Oakland, so I know these. I'm a West Coast person, so I've got any other West Coast people? Yay! Woohoo! So
Represent.
Anyway, oh yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's where it was, and
Yeah.
Berger was only there for a couple of years, so that was I think an instrumental thing for him, so to speak.
Yeah, it's very, very virtuosic. Another thing about wind chamber music, it is very virtuosic. I'm not sure why. Why is it so difficult?
I don't know, but I think principal winds is kind of how the whole idea even got started of an orchestra, principal winds of an orchestra, and they're just expected to be great soloists. And so usually the music sort of shows off that prowess.
Yeah, it's like they say, it's sort of the skills of being a virtuoso soloist as well as being an orchestral musician all tied into one. Yeah.
That actually ties into the dedication of the Smit, which is to the principal players of the Concertgebouw Orchestra in Amsterdam. Yeah.
And doubly on that, Smit at that time was meeting with Mio, and was also having influences 10 years earlier, about 8 years earlier, and so there's like kind of a double Mio. I'm just trying to think of a good pun, but I couldn't come up with it. Missed opportunity, but but no, that's it's wonderful. It's a chance to give the horn a break. Sometimes that's helpful. Right. And then we have the Irving Fine Partita, which is one of the kind of classic works in the repertoire. Maybe you can both say something about what your experiences with that.
I absolutely love this piece. It is probably my favorite wind quintet piece to play, and I first got introduced to this piece not by my chamber coach or by teacher, but I was in grad school and a composition student told me about this piece. He said, "Do you know the Irving Fine Partita?" And I was like, "No, I know Barber Summer music and the Hebert three pieces and Ligeti bagatelles. Those are the standards of the time. But Irving Fine Partita was not a, quote, standard piece. I'm not sure if it's technically still, if it is still, it really should be. But I remember he was telling me that, he studied this piece in his composition classes because of, I think it owes to sort of the Baroque forms, but he also sort of takes inspiration from the Baroque forms, the idea of the partita with the individual dance movements, as well as just constructually how the piece is put together and just the phrasing of it. And he was breaking this down for me, and I was like, whoa, I had no idea anything about this piece. And so then I finally learned it for myself, and I fell in love with it. And it's a piece that my group has had a long, long history with. So Zéphyros Winds has been around since the 90s, and we were a part of a celebratory concert here at the Library of Congress in maybe 2000, I think. And we performed the partita at the time. This was a year before I joined the group. And so the piece really sort of, I think, is sort of our group's kind of our home piece. So we've played this piece. I've been playing this piece ever since I've been in this group. And my love for this piece grows, and grows. And every time I hear it, I get goosebumps. And so like my favorite, and I was telling this to the group just yesterday, my favorite part of the piece is in the last movement. So it's in several, so it's in theme and variations, and then there's an interlude, a beautiful, beautiful interlude. There's a jig, and then the last movement is called the coda. And in the last movement, it has these very sort of disparate beginnings, and then it kind of dissolves into this procession. And it's like, it has probably the most gorgeous horn solo in all of wind chamber music literature. Every time I hear it and my group plays it, I get goosebumps. And so I hope you do too. It's this processional, it's sort of like a funeral march that begins very solemnly and in a very melancholic fashion, and then adds more instruments to complement the French horn, and then it starts to become just ever so bluesy. He brings in a few of these sort of blue notes just to kind of change things up, and then it doesn't quite have the spirit of like a New Orleans funeral, but it hints at that. It hints at the celebration past the melancholy. And so it is my favorite moment of all wind quintet. So I love this piece. So anyway, that's my take on it.
That was beautifully said. Thank you. So you have to like it. That's the takeaway. Okay. No, this is a wonderful piece, and so we're so pleased to have it on here. And we'll talk more about Irving Fine in just a moment. As we go to the next half, we have a bit of a piano spotlight. And maybe, Audrey, would you mind talking a little bit about Margaret Bonds and your experience with Troubled Water?
This Troubled Water by Margaret Bonds is a piece that's very, very, very close to my heart. I've performed it quite a lot over the past several years, and I actually discovered it during the pandemic. A dear friend, pianist friend of mine, was presenting, as we all did, a live-streamed recital from an empty concert hall at her college, and she programmed this piece among many others, and I was so taken with it, I immediately texted her right after her concert and said, send me that music, I have to play that piece. It's a wonderful piece. It's part of a suite, but it perhaps is Margaret Bond's best known solo piece. Margaret Bonds grew up in Chicago. She was an African-American pianist and composer. She was very, very brilliant. She was the first African-American soloist with the Chicago Symphony. And she studied composition with Florence Price. She did live in Chicago for quite some time. She attended Northwestern, where she was not allowed to live on campus at the time. And just a remarkable, remarkable woman. A little side story is that when she was still living in Chicago and had some private students, as most pianists do, to pick up some income, she actually taught Ned Rorem for a while. And anyway, she moved to New York and studied at Juilliard. She studied composition with Roy Harris, who has a bit of a connection, I think, to some of the other composers on the program, definitely. And in New York, she met Langston Hughes, and he really had a very, very profound influence on her. And so she's probably best known for her choral arrangements of with poetry by Langston Hughes. They became very close friends over the years. So just a terrific piece. I really love it. It's based on the spiritual Wade in the Water. And then I'm going to play the Irving Fine diversions in their original form. I wasn't familiar with these pieces when David asked me if I would play them, and they are so charming. They are charming and funny, and Jeff was listening to the quintet version this afternoon, and I remember you saying, just bring out all of that humor, and they're funny, but they're also very touching. And Jeff and I were also talking about the fact that I think that these pieces are so skillfully written that they, first of all, exist very successfully in not just the two versions you'll hear tonight, but another version, which is an orchestral version. And also that if you go on YouTube and you listen to performances of these pieces, you'll hear very, very, very different ways of playing them. Almost similar in a way to when you listen to different recordings of people playing Bach preludes and fugues and wildly different tempos, but they all seem to work because the music is that flexible. And I've just had a blast learning these pieces. They're absolutely delightful, and really excited to share them, and also for you to hear the amazing quintet version, which is world premiere tonight.
Well, thank you, Audrey. I mean, one of the highlights for me of this concert is being able to hear these back to back and get a sense to, so if you aren't familiar with these pieces, they are very digestible. The problem is that focus might be a problem because you might get diverted.
You got your pun in.
I had to save it for so long. But what's awesome is that we get to hear another wind quintet version of these pieces, and what is wonderful is that I really do think that these will have a life as a wind quintet piece. And Jeff, so I'm thinking maybe you could just tell us a bit about your process. How did you approach this music? Did things just kind of pop in your head about how you would orchestrate it, or just give us some background on your process with this?
Well, the first thing I thought, in all honesty, was I was going to go straight to the orchestral version. I think the orchestral version has so many colors that it brought out of the piano score. And I think the easier thing to do, not that I was trying to find the easy road, but is to listen to all the full palette of colors that were imagined from the piano score, and then do the hard part and try to make that work for a condensed score. It gives you, it's like being in a candy store. It's like, what do you choose? How much of this, how little of that? And so I just enjoyed every minute of doing this transcription. It's so filled with humor and wit, and like you were saying, all the different wild tempos that one could take. And so I honored the score, the original score, in terms of what the tempi were. But just in this hearing, you all were taking your own liberties and so on, and I love, especially in the tango, really, really just sort of like pulling it out, and that's what you would want anyone to do with this music, is just sort of dive in deep to it and bring out all of the different colors and the different sentiments that he put into it.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. Could you say a little bit about, just for people who aren't maybe as familiar with what a transcription is, just like about what are some of the difficulties that come into play, or is it just no problem?
Well, I'll tell you something. A transcription is a whole lot easier than, first of all, composing something, and and also doing an arrangement. I think the expectation when you're doing an arrangement is that you will come up with something creatively unique that relates to the music, but departs and gives it, your own take on it. when you're doing a transcription, you're really trying to honor the score as best you can, given the palette that you have. And so the difficulty is, what do I do when it's all strings? You know, and what do I do when actually the chord requires, you know, 4 or 5 chord tones with a soloist, you know, and so the instrumentation then becomes a little thin, and so you have to really think about what notes are most important, what, you know, and so that is kind of like the puzzle that you have to sort of put together, but that's the fun part. I actually found that to be the most fun, the most engaging thing is just, again, trying to choose from the palette that was already there what really helps to bring out the score. I hope I did that. I really hope I did that.
Did Irving Fine do the orchestral version of it? Did he?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm curious, from listening to the piano version to Fine's orchestration of it, like what did you notice about his choices, and did that affect your choices for us 5 limited people?
I have to say I didn't listen to as many piano versions as I probably could to make a true comparison. But the biggest thing that I took away from the different versions was the lushness of the score, the orchestral score. When all of the strings and the brass are just really, really, it just feels not just louder, it just feels, it has depth, you know. And so I wanted to try to get that depth into the quintet score as much as I could, and so that really gets into the weeds, about like voicing and which instruments give certain timbres that will project, and so you don't almost trick the ear of the listener. You think you're hearing more of a lusher score than you actually are, because certain instruments just have that sort of projection and certain combinations.
French horn.
Yeah. The French
Very
horn,
loud
I'll
instrument.
tell you, the Zéphyros quintet is amazing. The horn player is doubly amazing. Zohar is just fantastic. And so I kind of gave him a lot to do. I'm a fellow horn player too, so I feel his pain, sort of.
You can get away with it for that reason.
Actually, so I'm curious, so because you've written you've composed and also done other transcriptions for people you know, right? And so how much does that play into your choices?
That's a great question. I, for years, played in a wind quintet where there's such great musicians that when I could bring in, and this is the early part of my composing career, I could bring in 20, 30 bars of a piece that I was working on. And I always said, if it sounded bad, what I brought in, likely it was because it was bad writing. Because these were great, great musicians, you know. What you end up doing, though, is learning truly the capabilities of the instruments in the hands of capable musicians. I know this quintet. Zéphyros is just phenomenal. They are phenomenal. And so I know that I can stretch when it comes to asking musicians to do certain things. I didn't write anything impossible, although Jen had a word or two about this one little phrase that I wrote for her that she sounds great on, of course. But writing for people that you know, especially when you know their capabilities and you know that they're going to bring a certain ethos to the music, I do that all the time. That is how I compose. I think of the ensemble and the musicians in the ensemble, and I allow them to, you know, sort of pour their hearts into it. And I think that's where you end up getting great versions of the same music, is that an ensemble like yours puts out this great version, and then the younger folks will hear it, or other ensembles will hear it and go, oh, that's what's possible here. I thought it was difficult, but I heard Jen Grimm play it, and that's the standard to live up to. And so that's the way I do think of the musicians, absolutely.
That sort of reminds me of Robert Schumann, you know, writing all of those pieces for Clara, or Dutilleux writing pieces for Geneviève Joie. And sometimes I mean, these pieces are all amazing, right? But they're extraordinarily, extraordinarily challenging. Like what you're speaking of, and I can't help but think that sometime Clara must have just thought, oh, geez. Like, couldn't you just give me some chocolate or something? You have to give me another piece of music that I have to practice for 100 hours?
That's so true.
Really?
I didn't think we were going towards the Schumann thing, but that's a good one. I like it. Well, thank you for all these thoughts on this, because it's a fascinating topic, and I think one of the things that you mentioned that's important for everybody to remember is that there are lots of different ways that you can do it. And one of the things I'm excited about with this is that when you have a certain knowledge of the tessitura, like what an instrument sounds like in a particular range, what it sounds like in combination with other instruments, in the way that people do who have been playing in wind quintets for decades, it makes it just a special sort of situation, I think. Why don't we move on to the Ruth Crawford Seeger Quintet, which is one of my favorite quintets for sure. And it's this is also, I should mention, the Irving Fine collection is at the Library of Congress. So we have these manuscripts, and I think we'll see some on display in the other room over there in the foyer. But also Ruth Crawford Seeger's materials are here. And so that's, maybe just say a few words about this piece. You both have.
Well, this is my first experience with it. I had not heard of this piece before, and it's really delightful. And so I'm really excited to be able to present this piece with my group today. And it's short. There's a lot in it. It's rhythmic. It's got a lot of sort of rhythmic vitality to it. It's like got a groove, but like a very sort of a groove that's a little stilted. But that's what the best grooves are. Like if it's just like a straight groove, it can get kind of boring. But this is like boom, ba ba, dun, da 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 dun, da da dun, da 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 dun. So it has like a dance feel to it, but like kind of off kilter dance. So it really it's very enchanting to listen to. I really like it. It's very unique, and it really is. It's the first piece of hers that I've actually experienced. So I didn't know much about the composer's output at all, but it's a real joy to play, and also very hard.
Well, that's what I've heard, is it's very difficult. But this was just for people to know. This was her last piece that she composed before she passed away, cancer, and it also comes after a period of about 20 years of being away from composition. And she was actually at the time working at the Library of Congress for a while during that period. And this is not to denigrate what she was working on, which was folk song materials and doing a lot of work in that area. But it was her big return to composition to do this suite for wind quintet. And there's in a certain sense, it's almost like she hadn't skipped a beat other than one of the maybe the 7/8 type.
7/8, 10/8, whoop, ba-dum-ching.
But I can be obstinato with that type of. All right, but it does have one of the great.
It's the dad. That's dad jokes. I'm telling you. We were talking about this backstage.
It's very true.
I remember there's this beautiful moments in it that I remember we were playing through the second movement, the slow movement, and there are parts where you can't tell what instrument is playing, and so there are instruments that are doubled in a way it sounds like an instrument that's not one of the five of us. Like, what is that sound? And sometimes, and I remember I was like, we're in rehearsal and I'm playing. I was like, oh, I'm matching a note with somebody. Who am I playing with? Like, what sound am I listening to? Because it's like this, a composite instrument, And then there are other moments where you'll hear the sustained sounds, and then you'll hear other instruments play a melody with the sustained sound underneath it, which is something that that a composer used in a much later piece, John Harbison's third movement. There's so much of that in John Harbison's piece, which was from the 80s or something, I can't remember. Yeah, much later. And so, you can hear this technique being used in a really ingenious way in the second movement here.
You know, it's a good point that actually in many ways the whole piece is about doubling in some ways, where the harmony is derived from basically notes being held after they're attacked by a particular instrument. So you have that's happening all throughout the first movement. It happens in a different way in the second movement, but also in the third movement too. And so like you have these like crazy flute and bassoon duos that are kind of like the thing that always returns in that third movement that are happening all at the same time, and it's a wonderful thing, and it's kind of an unusual sort of way to structure a piece. You can tell that it's structured in a very deliberate way, but it doesn't feel like a mechanical sort of lifeless sort of a thing. It feels the opposite of that to me, at least.
Yeah, every time, so the third movement begins with a flute and bassoon, very virtuosic, unison, intense. There's accents every beat, da 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 da, and it's like it drives, and you think you're like, oh my god, and then it goes off into this episode where you hear a lot of these doublings and a lot of this sound whirl, like sound is whirling around, and then it's the flute and bassoon again going, but it's more intense, like it's faster, and then again, swirling winds, and you're like, okay, I'm finding myself again, and then it comes back again. And so it's this repeated thing over and over and over again, and it's very, very powerful and very effective, and also very hard. A common theme. It is a common theme with wind quintet music. It's difficult, but we signed up for it. It's okay. It's all right.
Well, it's you mentioned Harbison as well, and this idea of doubling and everything, and it's one of the things that, and I think you even, Audrey, you might have sort of harped on this a little bit. It's one of the things about the wind quintet is that, it's 5 different instruments, and some of the best scoring, I have to say, for wind quintet is when they try to find different combinations of, and instead of, I should say it this way, instead of trying to be homogenous, instead of trying to sound like a Haydn string quartet, they really celebrate those different colors and put certain instruments in pairings and sometimes in ranges that they're not commonly heard. And that's where that intensity comes from, is these, you never hear flute and bassoon duos doing, that sort of intensity and blocks of chords. And so the composers that celebrate that those differences, like the Ruth Seegers and the Harbisons, I think you start to hear music that is uniquely wind driven, and it has its own sort of I don't know what the word would be, but it's not of the normal canon, I could just say, of like string quartet music.
That's wonderful. Well, let's look at the last piece, which I have to say I'm pretty smitten with it. This is a piece that was written in 1933 by Leo Smith, and it's really I did not know this before we ended up programming it, and it's a wonderful piece. But maybe Audrey, and you can tell us a bit about it. And
Yeah, this is a new piece for all 6 of us. And it's a terrific piece. Leo Smit was a Dutch composer, a Dutch Jewish composer, and tragically was murdered in the Holocaust. And so his life was cut much too short, and we've lost a brilliant composer. He did spend a lot of time in Paris, and the sextet, I think, really shows that Parisian influence. I think if you didn't know anything about Leo Smit and didn't see the name on the program, you might think that it was by a French composer. There's a little bit of Stravinsky influence, I think. The quote-unquote sort of standard or most famous piece for wind quintet and piano is the sextet by Francis Poulenc. And I think there's some influence of Poulenc in this piece as well. It's a lot of fun. It's 3 short movements, basically fast, slow, fast, although the middle movement, the slow movement, also has a fast section in the middle that I've been calling a Dutch sea shanty. We've had a great time putting it together, and I think it's going to be a great way to round out the program.
yeah, this have you done this combination that often? And I just want to point out that, and I hopefully I'm not incorrect about this, but I think that this piece was premiered a few days before the Poulenc.
That's
So-
correct,
so
yes.
it was not it wasn't like it was he was listening to it and it was
Right.
just in the air or something at that time that this
Right.
sort of, writing was there. But
Yes, that's true.
He was inspired by Tweel.
Oh, yeah, another difficult.
Do you know when that piece was written? So, yeah, Tweel, do you know that? So it's piano and wind quintet, but it's steeped in the Romantic era.
Is
so-
it really, really hard?
Yes.
The Smiths really hard too, by the way.
We only play really hard music, apparently.
well, one of the additional considerations that maybe we don't think about when we're looking at string quartets and things like that is that, well, they have to do it too, but wind players have to breathe. I've heard, and that's one of the things that becomes a factor is that you're thinking about endurance, you're thinking about all these different things, and some composers don't think about that so much, and those are the ones that we seem to play often. But anyway, that's just another one of those considerations. But
In this piece, it has such a big sound, and I mean this is sort of the hallmark of wind chamber music is our capacity to play loud and to have this full, rich sort of dynamic. But it's thick, and it really sounds like there are 20 people on stage, but there's really only 6. And so that's like the power of this kind of repertoire is to have that fullness, to have it really sound like a symphony in many ways. It has this symphonic feel to it. Maybe in a salon, very salon-like, but it is very lighthearted in many ways. But it has this kind of frantic energy, like frantic nervous energy. Is that like a French thing too, or is it a Dutch thing? Or, I don't know. Je ne sais quoi.
well, and the piano part is also, it seems pretty wickedly hard in many ways.
It's really, really, really hard.
But the effect is worth it. I think that's like this effect, to achieve that lighthearted effect is one of the hardest things to do sometimes.
I think we've set ourselves up pretty well here. Everything's really hard.
But the thing is, right, if it's supposed to sound light, right? And so it's supposed to sound sort of light and effortless. And that's always the hardest thing to do, is to have it sound like you're not trying. Right? That's in all things in life, right? If it seems like you're really trying hard, it's probably like, it's a little bit difficult. But if it seems like, it just seems so easy, like that's like the hallmark of a great piece, to have it sort of have that kind of feel to it and have that kind of sound to it. But then underneath, there's a lot of work happening. It's like the image of I use this when I teach flute lessons, like an image of a duck on a water, like above the water, it's very serene, but then underneath the water. And so it's that same kind of feel. So like what you hear is like calm and cool and like, oh yeah, no big whoop. And then like inside we're like,
I love that. Well, listen, we're running out of time. We need to give you time to get ready for the concert. I'm wondering if each of you could just say a little bit about what's next, what's on the horizon for you, and the near horizon, about other projects that you're up to. I just would love to hear.
Sure. I'm actually going to be teaching at a festival in Emmitsburg, Maryland, in the early part of this coming week. And then later in the summer, I'm teaching at a festival in upstate New York, which is for advanced adult amateur musicians. And they're amateurs only in the sense of the word that's not their profession. I mean, they practice, they take it very, very, very seriously. And that's a lot of fun. Yes, at Colgate, yes. And you'll be there? Fantastic. And I'll be playing actually a piece by Don Crockett. It's for flute and piano, with, and it's a new piece of his. I was blanking on the name because my phone auto-corrected his name to Crockpot. And so, so I've been referring to it as the Crockpot piece. Anyway,
That
so.
joke was a
yeah.
slow cooker, but
And then I'll be going up to Saskatchewan to visit my family. I'm from Canada. Shout out to Canada. Oh, Canada. And Jen.
So the quintet is off for the summer. We're going to be rejoining ourselves back in the fall with a residency at Brooklyn College, which is where our clarinetist teaches. Our quintet, we're in 4 different states, and we have other careers on top of playing in a quintet. So I live in Miami. We have two members live in New York. Fatma is the closest. She lives in Baltimore, the oboist, and our bassoonist lives in North Carolina. And so we kind of go off and do our other parts of our musical lives, and then we rejoin back in the fall. So.
I will be joining the faculty at University of Buffalo in the fall after years at Oberlin College, where I taught French horn. Oh, is it Obi? There's an Obi. After years of teaching horn for many years, in fact, but only 4 at Oberlin, I really realized that I wanted to compose more. And very fortunately was able to get a position at University of Buffalo where they really do emphasize composition. So I'll join the faculty there in the fall, and they're supporting pretty much all of my projects there. So I'm looking forward to it.
that's so cool. Oh, that's well. Please join me in thanking our guests for coming. Thank you, guys.